We'll be demonstrating the difference between different power tubes and different preamp tubes. While there are a bunch of different types to choose from, we're only going to be choosing a few of our favorites and then comparing the differences. For the power amp tubes, you can't just swap them out easily. You have to bias your amp. For this example, we'll be using a Hughes & Kettner Triamp Mark III because it's self-biasing. We don't have to worry about rebiasing when we change those tubes out. Now, for preamp tubes, you can just swap them out for any type. You don't need to rebias those. So let's start by listening to the difference between 3 different popular types of power tubes. So the biggest difference that I'm hearing right away is definitely in the more distorted tone. Let's listen to the first 2 tubes and compare them. So the first one there is a 6L6. That's this one. And the other one is an EL34. They have similar qualities. They're definitely great for high gain amps. The 6L6 naturally has a slightly brighter sound than the EL34. Listen again for that. I'll just play the 6L6 first. You can hear the EL34 is a little more reserved, a little less bold in that area. Let's listen to a little different part of the riff. They both sound good, but the 6L6 sounds like it may naturally have a little more gain and just a little brighter. Let's now go to the other example with the high lead. They both sound pretty good here. To me, it's the same where the 6L6 is a little brighter, but it's not making a massive difference. The 6L6 and EL34 definitely have a bigger difference in that higher distorted part. I may choose the 6L6 over the EL34 in that particular case. The 6L6 versus the EL34 in this particular case may be difficult to distinguish. I'm not hearing a really huge advantage over one or the other in this one. So let's listen to the more clean example now. Just still comparing these 2 tubes. You can just see that the 6L6 again has more output. It distorts a little easier. All right, now let's listen to the JJ Electronics KT77s and compare those to the other ones. They seem most similar to the 6L6. Let's listen to a different part of the riff. Again, there's not a huge difference. I may hear the tiniest bit of clarity on the pick attack, a little bit more than the 6L6. And again, that EL34 is a little more reserved than both of these in that regard. Let's listen to the other lead on the KT77s. Again, for this specific type of a riff, it's not making a huge difference in that regard. Let's hear the clean. Now for the clean, for whatever reason, the KT77 sounds closer to the EL34. So if you kind of liked that clean of the EL34, but you wanted the more high-end gain of the 6L6, you may reach for a JJ Electronics KT77. All right, let's dive into preamp tubes now. You're going to hear 4 examples. The first 3 only have the first tube in a series of 9 tubes changed, because apparently that makes the biggest difference. But you know here at UGP, we put that to the test. On the fourth example, we changed it so all the tubes are the same, and we're going to compare the results. Let's listen. All right, now let's listen to those in quick succession so you can hear the differences accurately. All right, so right off the bat, and I've seen this in the last section, where the distorted part seems to make a bigger difference than the clean part. So let's compare these distorted guitars. Now the first two, that was an ECC 83S JG Electronic preamp tube. The next one almost sounds like the EQ changes. It has a more of a nasally sound, like an oh, that kind of sound, versus the first one, which sounds a little more open. It's that lower mid-range that's increasing. So just between these two tubes, if you were looking for a more open sound, you would go for the ECC. But if you wanted to have a little more low and mid-range and less gain, you would go for the 12 AT7. Let's keep listening to the other ones. So the 12 AX7 is a really popular tube. You may have heard of that one. This one sounds very similar to that first one, the ECC 83S. They definitely have their own unique voicing. Let's listen to a different part of the riff. It sounds like overall the ECC 83S has a little bit higher gain, but the 12 AX7 is definitely a good one. I think, honestly, if I was going to choose one of these, it would be between the ECC and the 12 AX7. I'm not a huge fan of that 12 AT7. It sounds a little odd to me. Now, let's compare what it sounds like whenever you just change the first tube to a 12 AX7 and leave the rest as something else. And for this example, those other tubes were ECC tubes. So the first one's going to be the 12 AX7, and then the second one you're going to hear is all 12 AX7s. People say that it makes more of a difference to just change that one tube. Let's see if there's that big of a difference when we change them all. So there's definitely a difference here between these. It sounds like the 12AX7, where they've all been changed, is a little gainier. But if we go back to the for the second example where it's the 12 AT7, where just that first tube was changed to the AT7, there's a bigger difference. A bigger difference than changing the first one from the 12AX7 to all of them being 12AX7. So there's definitely some truth to that statement, but there is a difference when you change them all. So let's listen to these other riffs and see what the differences are. It's kind of hard to tell in this the difference between the first one, third one, and fourth one. But again, that 12AT7 is less gain for sure and has that low mid-range bump. Let's listen to the cleans. Those are pretty similar in my opinion. I don't even know if I'd be able to choose. I feel like we heard bigger differences before this, and even in changing the power tubes, there were bigger differences than I'm hearing in this clean section. So that should absolutely give you enough information to understand that there are differences between power tubes and preamp tubes. Maybe you can choose your favorite and start using that.